So accelerating trade across the African continent, that certainly is topping the agenda. At the Intra-African Trade Fair, which is currently on in Durban, many discussions around trade-related policies that support economic integration and development. My co-anchor Ayanda Nyathi joins us now live from the Durban ICC, where that event is taking place. It's day 2 today, Ayanda. And one just wonders, you know, the issues around trade-related policies, when it comes to intra-African trade, does that become a complicated process?
I imagine it does, especially once you start thinking about the scale at which that trade is likely to take place, if, of course, it's carried out correctly. Part of what the objective is in some respects is a platform like this will lead to material change for countries that are involved in this particular fair, using, in part, the African Continental Free Trade Area. But a man who knows a whole lot more about this than I do is a guy called Yusuf Dai. He is the Trade Policy Director at the African Bank. Thanks very much indeed, Yusuf, for speaking to us. It's lovely to have you on the program. Let's speak about what it takes to get intra-Africa trade going. And perhaps let me start by just asking more specifically, do you find that fairs like the one you and I are attending today typically lead to policy change for the participating countries?
Thanks, Ayanda, and good morning to your listeners. Good morning to you, and thank you for having me. Well, fairs like this are quite important in the context of intra-African trade particularly. The idea of an all-African trade fair is not something new.
Right, I'm going to try to stop you there because it looks like we're having issues with your mic. I'm going to try reach out with mine instead, just so we make sure that we can hear you correctly. So forgive the logistical situations we have to deal with, but there you go. I'll even stand at the very least. It's by no means a sign of any kind of hierarchy. Please start that response again.
No, so I'm saying, Ayanda, an all-Africa trade fair is not something new. The idea was started in the 1970s under the Organization of African Unity, where we realized that the level of intra-African trade remains quite low. It's been stubbornly low at around 14%, compared to other regions like Europe and Asia, which is above 60%. And what that means for Africa is that we remain exposed to global volatility. We remain price takers, and because we are a commodity exporting continent, we are beholden to global prices, and we're at the mercy of global prices. Intra-African trade stimulates some kind of insulation. It limits our exposure to this global volatility. But one of the key challenges to intra-African trade is we don't know what our neighbors produce. Right. It's simply an information gap and an information asymmetry. And what trade fairs like this do, it tries to bridge that gap. It brings the African producers, African manufacturers, African service providers, financial institutions together to show what is available on the continent. So yes, these trade fairs have an impact. The inaugural intra-African trade fair that took place in Cairo in 2018 saw 32 billion in deals being closed. It saw one of the largest EPC contracts being concluded by African institutions, financed entirely by African banks. And it certainly stimulates policy dialogue and policy change, highlighting the importance of driving intra-African trade, not only through agreements, but through practical measures and practical steps.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. I mean, you know, we've heard in the past before that if we on the continent are able to get to something like what's taking place in the global north at the European Union specifically, it might take a couple of years. In fact, many pointing out that it took decades before the EU can get to a point where it's operating at. Speak to us about the timelines that we're thinking of here on this continent, given perhaps the distance we still need to travel.
Yeah, well, the African Union, the African Economic Community, is enshrined in the Abuja Treaty, and it sets out a timeline for the achievement of the African Economic Community, which is by 2032. One of the key steps in reaching that journey is the conclusion of the African Continental Free Trade Area. When we see the speed with which the negotiations were concluded, they started in 2015, concluded in 2018. The agreement was signed in 2018, and start of trading started this year. The next step is for us to move to our Continental Customs Union and progress incrementally to an economic community and a monetary union as enshrined in the Abuja Treaty. It is a time-bound project. It is a difficult exercise. It is not simple. We have 55 African countries, all at different levels of economic development, which creates complexities. But the drive to that integration, that drive to that continental ambition of being one united Africa is there, and we see it in the African Continental Free Trade Area.
You speak about complexities to do with that trade area. Some countries are yet to be ratified. Is that something we should be worried about?
No, I don't think so. I think the agreement was signed in 2018. We currently have 42 countries that have ratified it. 54 of the 55 African countries have signed onto the agreement. I think what needs to be taken into account is that the process of ratification is different in different countries. The parliamentary processes may be a bit longer, but all the countries have continuously expressed their commitment and all are actively participating in the process.
Part of what it takes to get this right is ensuring that there's enough, for lack of a better term, public-private partnerships. Any country in the continent, through the work that you've done, that you feel particularly get that right?
Yeah, I think there's numerous examples. There's so many to mention. We look at the host country of the bank's headquarters, Egypt, have demonstrated the success of PPPs from the 1990s. South Africa is a good example. Countries in East Africa, Kenya, Nigeria is stepping up its private sector engagement through the energy sector. So we see it in a range of sectors across the continent. And I think why it's important is that we know that governments are resource constrained. And that financing gap, the infrastructure financing gap of over 100 billion, needs to be filled somehow. So those private sector players need to be brought in. They provide the financing, they provide the capacity and the skills. And that is how we'll develop Africa, through those arrangements.
It goes without saying that, there's a perception about Africa in the world, right? Because of developments within countries themselves, the kind of economies that they're able to run. How are those perceptions, do you think, playing into a fair like this specifically, but more broadly, playing into the continent's ambitions of trying to get this kind of single market going throughout the region?
Well, perceptions are there. If you look at it from a financing perspective, Africa is usually perceived as risky. And this is what this fair tries to do. We want to show the world that Africa is open for business. Africa opportunities exist. Africa is the growth center of the globe. We have the fastest growing population, the fastest growing young population. We have the natural resources, the human resources, and we have an innovative and entrepreneurial youth program, youth population, a demographic that will place Africa as the next global center of economic activity. Right. And the trade fair hopes to do this. Yeah.
Lastly from me, Afreximbank has thrown a lot of its weight behind something like this. Specifically, at least from the line of work that you're hoping to do, what are you hoping the bank itself at least will be able to walk away with come Sunday?
We want to showcase Africa. We want to showcase the IATF, create this brand and the sense of African unity and this integrated market. We want to generate business. We want to show that Africa is open for business. The opportunities exist. And this is where Afreximbank, as a development finance institution, plays its role to deliver that development impact. It's not only about generating business deals for the bank, but it's about developing Africa.
Yusuf Daya, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us. I really do appreciate your time. As mentioned before, Yusuf is the trade policy director, beg your pardon, for Afreximbank. And there you have it. A lot of it, of course, is about ensuring that there aren't only productive negotiations that take place, but those negotiations lead to actual change within the countries that are represented here. There's a whole lot of optimism and at the very least a kind of concerted effort to ensure that there is meaningful collaboration. And of course that is, I imagine, going to be the thrust of the time being spent here as the heavyweights from different countries continue to rub shoulders.
Ayanda Nyathi, live to us there from the Durban ICC. Thanks so much for that discussion.